Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson at the Illinois State Water Survey, and uh, the webinar today is entitled How to Find Local Information and Help. As you may know or may not know, we do a webinar at least once a month on different topics or for different groups of specialists, if you will, related to private well issues. And this is a webinar that we had done once before. I think it was like in 2014 or 2015. And so it's completely different and up to date with resources and suggestions. And so it may have a little more material than some of our webinars in the past. And I just want to point that out. I'm going to be rushing through some of the images from different states and things that they have available so that we can get through it all and give everyone a sense of what might be available if they're willing to go look, is the bottom line. I do want to say that the funding for the private well class comes from the Rural Community Assistance Partnership and US EPA. We're a partner with RCAP on this program. We're kind of the online presence, and they're doing more of the boots on the ground. They have staff in every state, and I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, they're the reason we have our program in the first place. If you are a LEHP, a licensed environmental health professional, you can get credit from both for Illinois credit for this webinar or through NEHA, and you can email us at this email address, info@privatewellclass.org. Katie is on the line, who works with me on this project, and she will have all that information. And I believe there's a couple handouts on your GoToWebinar menu near the bottom that you can download too. So this is part of a national program, as I mentioned, that's being implemented through RCAP. This particular webinar is really based on lesson 7 of our 10-lesson class. And for those of you who may think that our webinars are our class, they are not. We have a 10-lesson class. You sign up online. It sends you a PDF once a week for 10 weeks. It walks you through from the very beginning, how the water gets in your well, well types, all kinds of issues, including how to find local help and resources, and on sampling and treatment and other issues as well. I highly recommend that you take those lessons and read through them. It is a lot broader based information than we can provide in an hour-and-a-half webinar. And this webinar is being recorded, so we have all of them recorded that we've ever done, and you can go and watch those. And the thing I'll mention about that is, even though some of our webinars we've done multiple times, like groundwater or well care 101, the first half or so is certainly the same material, the slides that we provide, but the last half are questions that people ask that were actually on that webinar, like you all did when you signed up for the webinar today. And so the questions are always different. And so one of the things I recommend to well owners is go through all of our webinars, but just skip ahead if you've seen the material in the front to where the questions are, and a lot of times they're different, and we'll give you a much more broader based view of how people look at their wells and questions they may have and things you might not even have thought of. So so at the end today, we'll also have time, or we'll also make time for follow-up questions. So if anything that comes out today you have questions about that you didn't ask, on your GoToWebinar screen is a question box or a chat box. Katie's going to monitor that during the webinar today, and you can ask questions there, and we're making a list of those, and we'll share all those at the end and go through them. And if it takes longer than an hour-and-a-half in the end, anyone who's willing to stay will keep answering your questions until we're done. So, okay, with that, we're going to move on. Again, I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the State Water Survey. My job in Illinois at the State Water Survey is to help well owners, regardless of this program. And Katie, so I've been doing this for a long time, and Katie is an outreach specialist who works with us. She's going to field the questions. She also participates in all the activities related to the private well class and all the different activities that we do, including our videos and things like that. So, and she monitors our email address and those things. So a lot of times if you email us about anything, it's Katie that you'll hear from. So I do want to mention RCAP again, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. They're a national organization that's made up of 6 affiliates that are all nonprofits that work around the country. They have staff in every state. You can see which RCAP region regional affiliate is in your state. Illinois is Great Lakes RCAP, for instance, and they have staff working in Illinois and all of the other Great Lakes states on private well issues. They put on workshops for both well owners and sanitarians. They do well assessments. They can help you if you have in person with problems, and they do. It's a great group of folks that we work with, and we're all part of one team that implements this private well program that's funded through US EPA. So just quickly, a little bit about the water survey. We've been around for over 100 years. Matter of fact, next year we're celebrating our 125th anniversary. The water survey was started in the 1890s because of typhoid and cholera outbreaks, and it was a professor on campus in chemistry who was interested in documenting the water quality of Illinois and how come these things are happening. And so we've been around since. We're not a public health agency per se, but we do applied research, provide service, and we house the state's well logs, and we have a public service lab that does sampling for private well owners in Illinois. As an example, this is from Pana from 1915, Pana, Illinois, 1916, excuse me. It's an investigation the water survey did of a typhoid outbreak at the time. And this is obviously before we had these things under control in the US and before chlorination and some of those things. And they traced this to the Pana Ice Cream Company at the time. And it's just, this is in our files. We're going through them now, scanning a lot of old records like this that we have, and trying to highlight some of the work that's gone on in the last 125 years. Excuse me. So that's who we are. As far as well owners, I'm assuming most of you on the call today are well owners. And the thing to remember is that as a well owner, they're not regulated. It's really up to you as the owner to make sure your water's safe and your system is maintained. You're very much a water operator for a very, very small water system. Just like a water operator for a small community has to test the water regularly, upgrade the infrastructure when it needs it, make sure that treatment's doing what it's supposed to do, and that everyone has water pressure at their tap. In a small community, you are that person as the owner of a private well. The other thing to remember is that well water, you can't go by color, taste, or odor. They don't necessarily mean that your water's safe or unsafe. There's a lot of things that make water smell or taste or have a color that are really harmless. And there's things that you can't see, taste, or smell that are harmful. So testing is the only way to get around that. And I grew up on an old dug well, 14 foot deep, that my grandpa hand dug in 1933. But now I live in a Champaign area community, and I pay $40 to $50 a month to my community water supply. And that's the cost spread out over all the residents, about 50,000 homes, for sampling, maintenance, infrastructure, everything, so that when I turn on my tap, I always have clean, safe water that has adequate pressure. And this is your responsibility as a well owner to maintain and do. So it's important that you understand all those things, especially, the well I grew up on wasn't safe, and but my body got used to the water. But if somebody else comes and drinks our water, it may not be that way. And so it's important to make sure that you know what your water quality is and that your well water safe. And what our class and this program really intends to do is to help you understand what's important, why you need to understand your log, how deep your well is, where your pump's set, do you have a screen or not, what's the water quality, what's the water level. All those things are important. And also ways for you to understand how to find out if there are naturally occurring contaminants like uranium or arsenic that are just part of the Earth's crust. And there's nothing that anyone's done to cause that. It's just a natural occurring element or metal. And so how to find those things out. And also through our class, hopefully you'll learn to ask better questions so that when you do contact local sources of information, you're learning more and not asking basic things that you should know as a well owner. So, and the last thing, and we'll preach this every webinar, in our class lessons, and everywhere we speak and those sorts of things, you need to sample your well. That's the only way to know, and you need to do it regularly. Okay, so I do want to mention quickly that this week, if you look at the yellow highlighted box, is Septic Smart Week, which is a US EPA program through their Septic Smart program. And if you look at the top there, it's epa.gov/septic. There's a ton of resources available for folks who have septic systems, and some of those may not even have a well. They may be on a centralized water system, but they may have septic for their wastewater. And it's a great program. There's a ton of information here, and I'm not going to go through all that today, but I do want to point out that we did do a webinar in July. We do it once a year that's specific to septic systems. And if you go on our website under webinars and events, and go to past webinars, you'll come to a page where you can see a list, and then you can find this webinar from July. They're in chronological order, and you can watch this webinar that's specific to septic systems. And we bring in an RCAP person from RCAP Solutions who's a wastewater expert and septic system expert to participate in this because I'm not. And although I know a fair amount about septic systems, there's a lot of good questions that are asked at this webinar every year, and it's really worth watching or listening to. And if I didn't mention it before, because we're federally funded through US EPA, everything on our website, our whole program, all the materials we provide and resources are completely free, which is really awesome. So what we're going to discuss today really is about finding local information. So well logs, why you need to have your well log. You need to know the depth of your well, where your pump's set, the geology of where your water's coming from, what type of well do you have? Is it dug or bored? Is it in sand and gravel, or is it bedrock? That really matters. And then what well materials, what your well's made out of. Is it PVC? Is it stainless? Is it is it steel? Is it galvanized drop pipe, for instance? There's all these sorts of things that you need to know and should have an idea of when you start looking at water quality issues in your well and what could contribute to that. And then related well information about the aquifer you're in. There's folks who have that are in granite, which was questionable to even call an aquifer, like in Colorado, where they may only be able to pump a half a gallon a minute, and so they have special needs related to how they get water out of the ground versus someone who's in a sand and gravel aquifer that'll pump 1,000 gallons a minute if they really wanted to. So that, along with water level information and water quality, where your pump set matters based on the water level in your well. And if an aquifer is susceptible to, the water levels dropping during drought periods, then that matters for pump setting and water quality and a lot of other issues. We're going to talk a little bit about financial help. There are programs out there all over the country. Some are local, some are state, some are national. And we're just going to go through some examples of that. And then lastly, or not lastly, but we're also going to talk about sampling your well, the where, when, why, and how to do that to give you basic information on why it's important, especially. Okay, so getting started, really, we run a national program. I get questions from well owners all over the country, but when someone calls me, and the one I'll use is someone called me who's on an island in Georgia in the ocean. And so they're asking me about their well water. Well, I'm not the person to answer that particularly, especially about the geology and some of those things, because I've spent my career in Illinois. But I got this person in contact with someone in Georgia and helped them figure that out that way. The more you know and who those people are, those resources are locally at the county and at the state level in your state, the better off you are. And you'll learn that most of those folks, like at a state geological survey or USGS or Department of Health, they want to help you and they're glad to have you call. They want to make sure you are informed. And so, even your drilling contractor, county health department, or local health department, regulators who regulate well construction, or licensed drillers, co-op extension, and I said DERs and DEQs, DEPHs and DEPs. They come by a lot of different names, but they're the agency in the state that either regulates drillers, monitors well construction, or requires certain construction code. So for instance, in Washington State, that's the Department of Ecology, but in a lot of states, it's one of these four. It's either Department of Public Health or Environmental Protection or Environmental Quality or Department of Natural Resources. So they may come by a bunch of different names, but they have the same services, and you need to find out who those folks are and use them. That's the best thing. And the State Water Survey and State Geological Survey in Illinois, until 2006 were under our DNR, and then they moved us to campus, and now we're part of the University of Illinois as a department. But we were under DNR for a long time, and so that's a typical type of system. We house the state's well logs. We work with the county health departments who require the logs, and it's just the way to know what's going on in your state. You need to understand those relationships. So finding well information. So one of the questions we got asked was about finding well information, but in the end, if you know who drilled your well and you don't have a well log, you should be able to go to them and get the log. And you should just, this driller drilled your well, they did, they still have an office. Even if it wasn't that particular driller, that drilling company should keep all the records, and they do, because they want to make sure they're aware of where they've drilled, so they have a better idea of where they're going to drill next time they go to that area. So if you don't know who drilled your well, which is most of the time the case, unfortunately, and many times you don't. So in some cases you may know, and they may not be willing to share the log, and we've ran across that in 1 or 2 states. It's because there's such competition. They want to keep their information proprietary so that they know what the geology is in particular and no one else does. And then the next step would be go to the agency that requires logs to be filed. And that works in most places, but what I can tell you is most state agencies, they aren't going to have maybe even half of the logs for the wells that are actually in use. So, and that's because many wells were drilled before the rules requiring logs were started. In Illinois, that was 1968, but in New York, it was 2000. So any well drilled in New York before 2000 does not have a log filed for it. And, that's most of the wells there. And that's just the way it is. There are a few states that still have no requirement for logs to be filed, or they only require some logs to be filed. So like I mentioned Pennsylvania here, they don't license drillers holistically anyway, and they don't have well construction code. They're the only state, them and Alaska, which are trying to change their rules, and both of them are. But that's an issue. And in Mississippi, I believe it's 5 inches. It might be 4 inches. If a well is 5 inches or less in diameter, then a log doesn't have to be filed. Well, that tends to be most of the private wells. So they don't have a lot of private wells on file there. And again, getting some of those rules changed through a state legislature is a significant lift, if you will. And so a lot of times you just have to work around those issues. Like in Pennsylvania, for instance, they have a really strong private well program through their state extension office. And they also have a lot of user groups around the state. Even the League of Women Voters there are active in water quality and source water protection issues. And that's partly because of their state legislature not putting the rules in place that are needed to protect everybody in their wells and that sort of thing. And so again, it's important to understand all these stuff, just because you need to understand where your water is coming from, what things it could have in it, what type of well you have, and what that means as far as where the water is coming in the well, all those sorts of things. So we're going to cut through a couple searches, and this is the part that I hope goes fairly quick. So for instance, if you're in California, until 2 or 3 years ago, you could not get a log. I had well owners in California call me, and I'd say to them, well, I need to see your well log. They had to go personally to the county health department and get a copy, and then scan it or fax it to me, because the county would not give me those records. Well, because of all the drought issues they've had in California, now all of that is available online. And so it's pretty interesting to go through and see how much they've done in a short amount of time to bring all their information and make it available. And so I just Googled California water well logs. That's what you need to do in your state, and find out if you have one of these. I'm gonna go through 3 or 4 examples of states that even have mapping websites that show you this information. So if you go to I think it was the second link, I should have marked it, well completion reports, data sets. It takes you to this page. I clicked on down near the data link that says ArcGIS feature service after playing around with this for a little bit. And it tells you this was created in January of 19. But then up at the top, it says URL, HTTPS, HTTPS GIS water. Click on that, and it takes you to a page where it shows you some of the features. I clicked on under layers, well completion reports, and that takes me to another page that gives me the information if you're into GIS, especially if you're in California, maybe you're with a county or whatever. All this stuff you're probably aware of, but this is the level of information that's available. You can scroll down this page and find everything else about this feature layer. What we're interested in is clicking on ArcGIS Online Map Viewer, and when you do that, it pulls up this map viewer. You can scroll, zoom in, and I zoomed in near Fresno and just picked a well. And when you click on it, the dots that are I think they're red. I'm colorblind, I apologize. But those are the center of each section. So that's the center of a mile square. And those are just on the map. I'm not sure why. But the other lighter dots are the water wells. So I clicked on one. It says water supply domestic. And there's a long list here on this pop-up. And you can see where the bar is over on the right. I'm just down a little ways to show that, it's drilled by Easton Well Drilling. Their driller's license, address information. Up the page, there's it has a record number. It tells what the address is, so you can find if your well's in here, and it'll be listed by your address if they have a record. And this, I downloaded the Excel file for this just to see how big it was. It's a little over 1 million records. So they have at or around 1 million well logs records in their files for the state. And so when I highlighted it over in the search bar that's in blue there, their record number is WCR 0256562. And when I went back to the well completion reports data table, which lists all million, I guess it's 983,000 of those records. If I put that record in the search box, it comes up with that specific ID, and you can scroll across. You can see that bar is only maybe a quarter of the amount of information that's available, including depth, where they hit water, a lot of information, the address. And so you can find out a fair amount of information about your well now online if you're in California. So it's pretty cool. I also want to show, I mentioned New York didn't have logs on file until 2000 or start requiring logs to be filed. They do have an online site. It's a little more cumbersome, but it's available there. And honestly, I did this a couple years ago, so it could be better now. But you can find a well through this mapping system if you pull it up. And this well is 45 feet deep. The depth of groundwater is 19 feet. It's a bedrock well. And you can look at it this way on a map, or you can have an area and have it show a list like I did here. So you can see about the 5th one down is that well. It's on Mount Hope Road, and it's 45 feet deep. Depth of groundwater is 9, and the yield's 20 gallons a minute. I picked another well just to show, to look at the log. And so further down, the 4th one that's on Walmore Road, that's 42 feet deep, and the depth to rock is only 1 foot. I pulled up that log, and this is where we see differences in states that sometimes can be a problem. And this is the record they have. So it says the well depth's 42 feet, the casing's 10 inches, the water table's at 27. But there's things, it's all handwritten. There's a lot of detail not listed here. It says quality of water is okay. I'm not sure what that means. I don't know if it was tested. There's a lot of things missing from this, because I don't think this is their standard well log. This is the only information they had. And sometimes that happens even to us. We have records that go back over 100 years. Sometimes they're handwritten, and were done by Community Conservation Corps back in the late 20s, early 30s, where they inventoried wells in Illinois. And you take what you can get. And so there's a lot of differences in what you'll see with well logs. And if this was your well, you might be a little frustrated, but you do know the main things you need to know. It's 42 feet deep, that it's got pretty good amount of water, 15 gallons a minute. And yeah, so Illinois has its own through our state geological survey. It's called the Illinois Water Well Interactive Map, unfortunately named Illwater, in my opinion. But so you can click on that button, and it takes you to a page where you can see all the wells that we have records for in Illinois. And these are tied both to the GS and to our records. And so you can go over on the left side here under map layers and you can turn on aquifers, which I did. And that's the darker color there. It's a background. That's the Muhammad Aquifer. It's a sand and gravel aquifer in Illinois that's heavily used, that runs through the center of most of the state. And we're right on the edge, on the south edge of the aquifer in Champaign. And so you see all these wells, some of them are shallower in different aquifers, and these are the major ones. But if I zoom in, I'm near R. Willard Airport, which is the University of Illinois airport. I click on a well, it gives me some information there about when it was drilled, how deep it is, who owned it at the time, the location, that sort of stuff. And if I click on the API number, then it brings up, this is a generated log based on the geology that was typed in and the other information that's typed in a database. And the blue lines on this are records that the water survey has that are tied to it through our database. And so you can click on one of those and you can see actually a scan of the real log, not a generated log like this does that matches, you know, the old style they used to use. And this is from 1959, which is cool that we have it on file. But you can see, looking at the real log, that this wasn't filed until 1968. And there's actually a few discrepancies on here between the two. But, you know, the relevant information is here, the geology, the static water level, the type of, it was put in a pit. So this is before they had pitless adapters available, because they wouldn't have done that today. So there's a lot of cool information. But you can see that it, like under number 12 there, it says water from sand at a depth of 169. Well, the screen goes from, it's steel, it's casing liner pipe to 162 and then 7 feet of screen. And so the screen is from 162 to 169 there, and that's in that sand and gravel that's down at depth. The thing about a sand and gravel well is that means water's only entering the well from 162 to 169. That's not necessarily the case with a bedrock well, and I'll give you an example of that here in a second. So, okay, I guess I'm gonna do it now. So this is a bedrock well from Illinois, and it's actually a camp up near Chicago. You can see this is 260 feet deep, but all the information about the well is here. It was 5-inch diameter PVC from to 179 feet, and this is number 15 on the right. Then 20 feet of black steel, and that's to seed it in the rock. And then below that, it's an open hole. So you can see on the log number 18 that you hit broken limestone at 189, and then it's limestone bedrock to 257. And so if you do the math there, that steel goes 10 feet into bedrock and it stops. And so typically what's done with a bedrock well is once you hit bedrock, which you didn't hit it here until 189 feet, 187 feet, you put a casing in and seed it so it's sealed, and then the rest of the hole is open. The rock itself acts as the casing, and that's so you can take advantage of the fractures that are in the rock. If you had a solid pipe all the way down, you get no water. And so from 199 to 260, there is no casing. And that's not a big deal for this well because there's still 199 feet of casing. But like in New York, some of those wells that are in the area I showed that example from, bedrock's at the surface. Before the rules were in place, some wells may be 100 feet deep but only have 20 feet of casing, which means water can get in the well anywhere below 20 feet. So in this well, water can enter anywhere from 199 to 260. And that's important if you have a bedrock well. You can also see here, number 17, that the static level is 130 feet, which means that's the water level when it's not pumping. And then when they pumped it at 25 gallons a minute for 2 hours, it dropped to 160. Well above, you know, still above the bottom of the top of the aquifer, which starts at 189. And so it's got a lot of water and it's under pressure. And that's what all that tells you. Okay, so the other thing I mentioned was instead of just well logs, also information about aquifers and water levels and all that stuff. So Oklahoma, as it turns out, has some really good information. I Googled Oklahoma aquifer maps just to see what kind of aquifer maps there might be. I'm sorry, my phone just went off. And so I looked at the OWRB data and maps. That's right below the images that are shown there, and which is the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, I believe. they have a really great website. And so when you click on that, you come to this page. Everything is here: aquifers, well data, water levels, everything but water quality. And so I'm sure that's through the Department of Health or some other organization or state agency. But if you want to see the aquifers in Oklahoma, you click on the icon for Adobe, and it shows you all the major aquifers, major and minor aquifers in Oklahoma. You may not understand all those terms. I don't either. I'm not a geologist, but it gives you information and say, hey, I'm over here in southwestern Oklahoma. This SO aquifer, which I should have looked that up beforehand. Where is that guy? Anyway, you could say, I'm in this formation, my well's this deep. They can help you with that. And all of this is also available on a map. And so if you go to the map viewer, it says Groundwater Well Standards and Protection Interactive Map Viewer. You can just click through this. It shows you, it comes up with this really nice GIS format, shows you the entire state. All of those are wells. And then underneath that, you can see that there's different colors. Those are for the geology or the aquifers that are there that are sitting underneath. So if I zoom into an area that's not quite as populated, which I did in the southwestern part of the state, you can see here's what that looks like. And there's different colors for the wells. If you look on the left where it says layers, there's groundwater wells, monitoring wells, other wells, and reported well logs. Each of those are a different color here. And also below that, it shows aquifers, and you can, that's what you're seeing, like these red, that look like sea plants, if you will, or streams, or whatever. That's exactly what they are. These are the bottomlands around rivers, and that's an alluvial aquifer, and those occur, that's sand and gravel that's deposited because of when a river's high and it floods, it deposits these sands, so all those bottoms are full of sandy, shallow aquifers that can be put in use. So if I go to the aquifer part, and if you look on the bottom left, it says aquifers by class and type. And if you click on the little arrow, it brings that out to show you all four: minor alluvial, major alluvial, minor bedrock, and major bedrock. So I took all the others off and just showed the major bedrock aquifer, and that's this big splotch that's there, I believe in green, that's underneath. So that whole area is a major bedrock aquifer. And it's good to know if you have a well there and your well's 500 feet deep, it's certainly going to be in that bedrock. For instance, I say minor alluvial aquifers, we see these little fingers that I talked about. Those are river bottoms, and they're full of sand. And so there's probably some shallow wells in there. I don't think I go through all the colors, but blue is monitoring wells. The red are the other, I think, and the lighter colored ones, those are either yellow or light green, those are actually water wells. And so if you just say, so going back to the upper left here, there's groundwater wells, monitoring wells, other wells, and reported well logs. So the reported well logs are all of the wells. So this is all the wells they have in their database, and you can see these are the logs. This is the logs coverage, if you will, that's in their GIS layer. And then if I want to see specific ones that are monitoring wells or groundwater wells, then I can highlight, click on those boxes and turn them on. And so if I turn on monitoring wells now, you see all these. And the thing about a monitoring well, if it's a state well, it means they probably have water level data for it. They may have water quality data. So you happen to live by a monitoring well and you figure out that it's in the same aquifer, you can use it to figure out what the water levels are in your well. If it says the water level is 160 and your well is only 190 feet deep, it means you only have 30 feet of water in your well. That's just information. It's not typically going to be that way, but it's just so you have more information and understand some of those facts. If I turn on all the wells again, and then I click on a specific well, and I purposely clicked on a well that was in one of the alluvial aquifers, the shallow alluvial ones, and it shows you all the information again in this pop-up. It's in Comanche County. It's a groundwater well. It has the owner. All that information is public, just like it is in Illinois and many states. It's only a 60-foot well, and the water's at 19 feet. It says approximate yields 2 gallons a minute. I didn't look at the well construction on this to see how big of a well it is, but it's probably low. That's probably just a safe estimate. But this is a pretty shallow well, 60 feet. And that's because that shallow sand is near the surface and you're able to get to an aquifer at a pretty shallow depth. If you wanted a lot more water, or you needed, well, a lot of times for an irrigation well or for a larger well, maybe for a business or for a community, these small alluvial aquifers may not be enough of a supply, and you may not be able to pump upwards of 100 to 1,000 gallons a minute, whereas the deeper aquifers probably are. And I don't know if you can tell it or not, but the darker part of that color is because it's underneath on the background. That is that deep bedrock that we showed earlier. And so you can see how it is on the map. It's there if we just went back and looked at that layer. And so if I click on a well that's in that deep bedrock, here's another well that's a commercial well. It's 1,200 feet deep. They first hit water at 380 feet, and that's partly because they cased off anything it might have been above bedrock, and then the yield of that is they're approximating at 75 gallons a minute. So there's just a lot of available information through these types of systems. And I mentioned earlier we did this presentation one other time. It was in 2014. These things weren't available then. Most of these websites were not available in 2014. It's just been in the last 5 or 6 years that this has become more commonplace, and there's been resources for a lot of states to put this stuff up and online. And so there's a number of states that have this sort of information. You can also look at well logs. So if I go to that, click on it, and then click on water well record search, you get to a page here where you can search by well ID, county, legal location, or with water levels. And I chose that on purpose, and I selected Choctaw County. So if I say Choctaw County with water levels and hit the search button, it gives me a list of all the wells where they have water level data. And I just picked one that was shallow, right in the middle, Clint Miller. It's a 34-foot well. And when you view that, you can get the water level data. You can even map it. And that's what I did here. So you can see they've had measurements for the last 4 years. Every January, they take a measurement. And this is a shallow enough well that it probably really is dependent on rainfall and snowmelt. It's only 11 feet to water. And so it'd be much different possibly for a deeper well, maybe more flat and not show. Or if it's a well that's influenced by a high capacity well, like an irrigation well or a community well, if there were enough measurements, or some of these may have more continuous measurements, you'd see the effects of drawdown from other pumping and things like that. So there's just a lot of valuable information in this website particularly. So, so many of you aren't from Oklahoma or California or Illinois. So what about my state? Well, Google first and see what you can find. It was really easy for me to find that information. I did have to do a little playing around, but it's really good to learn about what's available in your state anyway. And so if there isn't a great site like one of these, then there is going to be, when you Google, whatever state water well logs, the agencies that house that information or that are have whatever information may be available are going to come up in your Google search. And that at least gives you an agency, and then you can call or email and get a contact. And so if you let them know what you're looking for, in most cases, they're going to be able to find information or tell you who to talk to. And you let them know you want to find more information about your well, water levels, geology, and water quality in your area, or your well possibly. And it certainly happens. We've had it happen here where someone's bought a property, they've asked us about their water quality, and we look in our records and the previous owner had had their water sampled through our lab. And so we can just, give them that information. And here's what we know about your well. It's high in iron, and which all Illinois groundwater is, and those sorts of things. So, and I'll just put out there in Illinois, this is part of my job. I get calls or emails from well owners regularly in Illinois. Our job is to try to help them find that information. Or someone buys a property and they're like, I'm going to put a house and want to drill a well. What do I need to do? What am I looking at? Am I going to need treatment? There's some areas in Illinois where there's high arsenic, and we can tell them that in advance that they should get it tested for arsenic because you might encounter it in this area, things like that. So be inquisitive, and if you run into a dead end, contact us. We would be glad to help you. But the whole point of this is we can't be the expert for the entire country as far as understanding the geology of your local spot. And so it's better if you learn who those people are, whether it be a county health department or a state agency. Every state has a geological survey. They map the geology, and a lot of those state geological surveys also have water chemistry or geochemists there that know a lot about the water quality of a given aquifer. And so reach out to them. They're more than willing to help. And most, like us, have an information line and people who that's part of their responsibility is to help well owners in their state. So we're going to talk a little bit about testing. So what do you test for? And this is going to get to where you can find information as well. What we tell well owners is it really matters on your situation, the depth of your well, what formation, which geology, what aquifer your water is coming from. Like we know some aquifers in Illinois have arsenic, so we'd recommend that, and known contaminants in the area. And the way you find that out is talking to people locally. So ask your local county or state health department for advice. If they know of an issue, they'll let you know and tell you this is what you should test for. You can also look online and see if there's water quality data available. And I'll show you a few examples of that here, things that we found. But two other points to make. Also consider, talk to your neighbors or your local drillers or county extension. And if there's something in the area, they likely know it already or have heard that it might be an issue. And so they can tell you that. And one thing we tell everyone, you sample for coliform and nitrate annually because they indicate a pathway into your well. They aren't necessarily harmful. Now, nitrate can be harmful to expectant mothers and babies under a certain age. But coliform isn't harmful itself. It's E. coli that's dangerous. The reason you test for coliform is because it should not be in your well, but if it is, then there's also a likelihood of E. coli, and it means there's a pathway into your well. And so by sampling for those two things every year, you're ensuring that the integrity of your well and your well cap and all those things is doing its job. So a couple examples. If you go to Massachusetts DEP, they've got a website set up where they've studied the uranium and arsenic in their state and know they've got a fair amount of it. So they've set up this site where you can enter your address and it will tell you whether or not you might need to consider sampling for one of those or both of those things. And they also provide some other resources here, including certified lab testing in their state and other guidance and that sort of information. So it's meant to be helpful to you as a well owner in Massachusetts. This is from Rhode Island Department of Health, probably my favorite slide because the little dots that are all over the state are where there used to be orchards and there was so much arsenic used that now it's in the soil and it's getting into the groundwater. So if you're near an old orchard, which you may or may not know, they've got them mapped. You can call them and ask. Remember, Rhode Island is about, I think, 30 by 40 miles or so as the entire state. But the big splotch in the middle is where they have high beryllium. And that's why this is my favorite map, because it really taught me you can't be too careful about what is a contaminant and what isn't. I had no idea beryllium was a regulated contaminant, but it is. EPA regulates it. Communities have to make sure it's not in their water. And it's got an MCL, which is the health-based standard that community water supplies have to go by. And so it's the only place in the country that I know of with high beryllium. There may be others, but it's not something we would ever recommend a well owner test for unless they're in Rhode Island in this area. So that's why you need to look online. You need to talk to your state or county health department or local health department and find out what may be a concern and what you should test for. And a lot of times they may give you varying advice. I know we run into problems where, especially for homes being sold, a county may say we only need to test for coliform and nitrate. And then later someone finds arsenic in their well and they wonder why they were able to buy this home even though it's high in arsenic. And that's a state problem, if you will, because getting that sort of legislation passed to require consistent testing is probably not going to happen. And so one of the messages we give to well owners, and especially if you're buying a property, is it's buyer beware. You can't count on anyone else but yourself to make sure you test that water and that you understand what the water quality is. No matter what it costs, it's better to do that before you purchase a home than to purchase it, find something later, and then be stuck adding treatment and the ongoing expense of maintenance for treatment equipment to make sure you're taking it out of your water. So it is buyer beware, and that's why you need to understand these issues and try to take care of them yourself and learn about what might be a problem. Here's a better website on water quality. This is so in Wisconsin, the state agency that regulates wells and well drillers is the Department of Natural Resources, DNR, and they put up this website that shows all the private water analysis they have, and you can search by county, you can search by township, or even by section for different things. And I clicked on arsenic by county, and what it shows me, now the arsenic standard for a community water supply is 10. So anything that's not green or clear is the average sample. Well, I used to take that back. You can see the legend there. Everything that's yellow or red is above 10. And so some of the areas around Green Bay where they're red, it means the average sample was over 21, 21 or higher. And so if you're going to buy a home in that area or you live in that area, you definitely want to look into that a little more, talk to DNR, and find out if and get your well sample for arsenic. And so, these things are useful to all of us, whether you're buying a home or not. But it's a good way to understand where there might be issues. And arsenic is a naturally occurring contaminant. It's the 7th most common mineral in the Earth's crust. And so you are going to find it in places depending on the water chemistry. And so there are certainly areas in Wisconsin where it's really high. I believe Wisconsin is a state that's actually legislated one of their bedrock units you cannot finish a well in because the arsenic's so high. So they require you to either case off that unit or stop before you get to it in order to put a water well in. So what we suggest is this list. And again, we do this at a national level. So again, you're not going to find beryllium, where the state and Rhode Island is going to say you might want to test for beryllium if you're in one of these counties. So it's really meant to, you always test for coliform and nitrate. It's really an indicator of that your well is being protected properly from surface contaminants. And then this list gives you a good general view of the metals and inorganics that might be in your well. And then also, depending on the type of piping you have, especially galvanized pipe that has lead, zinc, and cadmium, you want to test to see if any of that's being leached. And there's things like your alkalinity and your pH that will tell you how aggressive your water might be. In Illinois, we're, I guess, fortunate, if you will, that a lot of the water has a pH of 7.5 or higher, whereas in some other areas like the Piedmont Aquifer in Virginia, the pH is low. It's like 5.5, sometimes lower, I believe. And so there's more of a risk of your premise plumbing or leaching lead or copper and some of those things. So talk to your local health or state health department. These are really health-related issues, and so they should have the best idea. And yeah. So as far as getting it analyzed, every state accredits labs, and they do that. By state, I mean the state primacy agency, and that's the agency in each state that oversees all the community water supplies as required by the Safe Drinking Water Act. So every community water supply in every state has to meet all these rules, and they have to sample every 3 months, and they have to use a lab that's accredited. So there's a whole national program for accrediting labs to make sure that they can reproduce results and that they're doing a good job and all that stuff. And so you should try to use one of those labs. There are a few labs out there that, especially at universities, including ours, that are no longer certified. We used to be, but the cost became prohibitive. We follow all the rules. We use all the same methods. We just don't have that certificate. And I use our lab for all the sampling we do. And I just point that out because there's several other like ours. Virginia Tech has one, and so does Texas A&M, and a lot of well owners use those services. But whoever you talk to, if you want to go to a commercial lab or a private lab, they should be able to give you all the information you need. Ask questions until you're satisfied. If they can't answer your questions, or it's clear they don't understand groundwater, or they expect you to know everything, find another lab. And it's worth finding the right folks that are going to do good by you and understand what your situation is. And they should provide all the bottles and everything else you need. So if you go to you want to find a certified lab, I Googled EPA certified labs because I knew on EPA's website, is a map that shows every state, and you can click on those to find out where to get certified samples done in your state. And one thing I should mention before I go any further is that some certified labs will not sample private wells. They only do community water supplies. And that's what they've chosen to do, and not get into the private well arena, if you will. And so you may call a lab and it's really close to you, and they may say, oh, we don't do private well samples. The other thing that happens sometimes is they're required to use a specific method of testing for a certified sample. And sometimes for private wells, since they aren't regulated, they may use a different method that's easier or cheaper. I would ask and make sure and tell them you want to use the EPA certified method for the contaminants you're testing for, which may increase the costs. But that's how you're getting good results. So if you Google EPA certified labs, and you can see here, like the third one down is drinking water, and oh no, actually the second one, contact information for certified programs. It takes you to this page, and this is, if you scroll down this page, you can see at the bottom of this part, it says state certification programs and certified labs. Well, when I scroll down the page, that's at the top here, and there's a map. You can go to the drop down and click on your state, or you can just click on your state on the map. And so I went to a few of these. They're all different because they're going back to the state primacy agency. In Illinois, that's the Illinois EPA. In Ohio, it's the Ohio EPA. In Wisconsin, it's Wisconsin DNR. It just depends. In New Hampshire, it's the Department of Environmental Services, DES. And so a lot of them are public health. Minnesota's Department of Public Health. And that's the agency that has primary responsibility for ensuring communities meet the Safe Drinking Water Act, and that they're called the primacy agency. And that's their responsibility. They get money from the federal government to maintain those programs, and they're the ones who make sure that people are in compliance with the law for community water supplies. So for instance, I click on Alabama, takes you to this page at the very bottom. It's got certified labs. It's also for labs that want to apply to be certified in their state, but it also has a list of in-state and out-of-state chemical labs and bacteriological labs and even lead labs, and this page goes down further. So if you're in Alabama, you can, if you're just wanting a bacteria sample, you can do that, or a chemical sample. A lot of labs will be on both of those lists because they do bacteria sampling and chemical sampling, so inorganics, metals, everything else. And so you just have to look and go through the list. And in some cases, those lists are pretty long. This is New York State's, and you can, they've got a drop-down menu to help you. You can pick by county if there's something close, things that but ELAP is the program there. It's the Environmental Laboratory Approval Program, and that's a national program, I believe, that all of the all the labs have to meet in order to be approved, and then each state can have their own additional rules that they have to follow. South Dakota, they just list their labs. These are the labs that are certified, where they're at, who the contact person is, pretty straightforward. And then also I mentioned ELAP. So the National Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, which I thought was called NELAP, this looks like NELAC Institute. A number of states use this NELAC Institute to have their list of accredited labs. So I ran across several of these, and I just picked Oregon. And so you go to a website, and it may have multiple state information there. But it's how you can find in their management system, which is basically a database, what labs in Oregon can do testing, or that are approved for testing in Oregon. And I say that because there are a number of national labs that do testing in many states. And whether you want to use a lab like that, it's usually overnighting the sample, as long as you meet all the requirements for the analysis method. It's got to be there in 24 hours, blah, 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 blah. It really, comes down to convenience and cost and some of those things. You also are going to run across a few of these. And what I can say here is maintaining a page like EPA does that lists all the certified lab programs in each state is a moving target, just like it is for us for the things we link to. If you run across a page like Virginia's, where the URL is no longer good that EPA has on their website. If you'll email us and let us know, we'll make sure EPA knows about it so they can fix it and find out where that URL's changed. You know, you're at the mercy of maybe 100 different organizations that all made at any one time decide they're going to update their web pages, and now all the URLs don't work. And so it's a moving target. And so yeah, if you run across that, we would greatly appreciate an email, because we can get a hold of EPA for you and make sure that gets fixed, because there's a lot more than just you looking at that information, I imagine. So as far as interpreting results, there are websites and documents out there. I didn't include any, but there's a really good one that New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services developed called Be Well Informed, that you can take your sample results and plug them into this viewer on the web, and it'll tell you if anything's over an MCL and recommend even types of treatment. But what you really need to do once you've had your sample results is take them to your local health department and ask them to review the results with you. And if you find something, especially if something seems really out of place, you know, there are no arsenic highs in this area, but yours had, 1,000 ppb of arsenic, that could be some kind of sampling error. And so sometimes you might want to resample to confirm. And if you did a coliform bacteria test, you should boil your water before you drink it and before you can chlorinate it, and also test it for E. coli, because certainly if you have E. coli, it can make somebody sick, and you need to disinfect your well if that's the case, or even if it's just got coliform in it, because that indicates, again, a pathway into your well. Okay, so a little bit about funding and financing. There's a lot of costs to being a private well owner, and I tried to list them here. Not only drilling and replacing a well and water system components, things corrode, things get scale buildup, all those sorts of things. Pumps fail, you have all those issues, but also you need to sample regularly, and that's a cost. As far as protecting your well, it means managing your septic system, making sure that there are no abandoned wells on your property. If there are, you need to fill them in, because they're a risk not only to the source water you may be drinking, but also for safety's sake. And then you may have treatment in place because of a contaminant or a natural occurring element that is a health risk. And so those have to be maintained. And especially with treatment, if you have a filter or anything that has cartridges or that has to be replaced on a regular schedule, if you're not doing that, you're risking that treatment device becoming a source of bacteria or problems, because they will eventually either fail or build up with bacteria and growth. And so you have to maintain, and that's a cost. And again, many well owners don't understand those responsibilities. We run across folks all the time who have treatment equipment that's never been changed. And again, that's why they had bacteria problems. And we even had one of the regional private well folks from one of the state health agencies suggest that we don't include treatment as part of our class lessons, because he sees more treatment devices that become a source of contamination than actually protect the water and keep it free from contamination. So it's really important if you have any kind of treatment that you maintain it the way it's supposed to be. And I'm not going to go into detail, a lot of detail about financing and funding, because we did a webinar in March of this year. And again, if you go to webinars events, there's a drop down there, and go to past webinars, you can get to this. And it's got a lot more detail than I'm going to show you today about funding and financing options. They're really all over the map. There's no consistent thing, unless for folks who are severely or significantly economically disadvantaged, there's federal programs that can help them replace or add treatment or fix a well or septic. But otherwise, they're usually more local or state programs, and it really depends on what state you're in, what local jurisdiction, what agency might be available that's interested in this issue. And so it's there is no, you're not going to find every county health department that does a certain thing, or every soil and water conservation district that does well abandonment, for instance, but there are some. And the only way to find that out is for you to be inquisitive and go look online, and also contact them and find out if there might be a program. So most of this information came from either Derek Jones, who's with USDA and runs a national program, Margaret Mertens, who's Executive Director of the Water Systems Council, and also runs the Water Well Trust, which does well drilling for folks. And Cindy Elliott is with RCAC, which is the Western RCAP. She was a loan officer for providing low interest loans to private well owners in California and the Western states as part of that federal USDA program that Derek runs. And so I'm using some of their information today. All three of these folks spoke at our National Private Well Conference in May that we had in Pennsylvania, and all their presentations are also online on our website under our 2019 Private Well Conference. Okay, so the largest program is USDA's Individual Well Program. It's kind of a quasi-national program, and I say that because the funding is not available directly to a property owner. It's available to a nonprofit who then can loan it out. And so sometimes these are grants. They're very limited in that, but they're usually low interest loans like 1%. And so if you really have a well problem and you meet the financial criteria for income, you can a lot of times get money through this program for a well or well repair, a septic system. So this is their page, and I probably didn't need to show this because this is really for the nonprofits that would apply for that money. But the one reason I will bring it up is that if you, your local housing group or, nothing's coming to mind, but a nonprofit that helps, low income folks, they can apply for these and then help people in their area by providing these loans at low interest so that they can fix their well or treatment system or whatever. So these are grants to nonprofits that allow them to establish a loan program. So as it says here, they can construct, refurbish, or service household well systems. And the Farm Bill, this is through the Farm Bill, which just passed this last year for 5 more years. And the new Farm Bill added septic systems. But the USDA is still working on how to implement that program. And so all the rules probably won't be in place until sometime mid to late next year in 2020. But at that point, you'll be able to get a loan also to replace septic systems as well. And right now, the way the program is set up, it's $11,000 at 1% interest, but that's going to increase to $15,000 at the same time that the septic part is implemented to USDA. And again, homeowners don't get the grants or loans individually. They get them through the recipients of these grants from USDA. And so these nonprofits usually have a stake in a local area, and they work through their state rural development office of USDA. And here's some of the few that are out there now. SERCAP is the Southeast RCAP, and those are the states they work in. I mentioned the Water Well Trust, they're working in Arkansas. RCAC is the Western RCAP. They're based in California, but they serve 13 Western states. And WSOS is Great Lakes RCAP, and they work in the Midwest in the Great Lakes area. So you can see there's others like this Golden Triangle in Georgia. I think they only serve 3 counties, but that's the name of the nonprofit, and they applied for this funding just to help the folks in their local area. That's what they're there for. And so it really depends. Not every state's covered here, but there are opportunities through that. So RCAC has a unique program just because of the drought in California, and I'm highlighting this slide because this is the information from their program page. RCAC itself has put up another $7,000. So you can borrow $11,000 at 1% and then up to $7,000 more at between 1% and 3% that RCAC is backing themselves to help you get a loan to fix a well. There's also another program that the state of California is running through RCAC that's up to $40,000 to replace a well. And that's because of the drought there and so many wells that went dry. But there's, it's a great program. And it's just an example of some of the things that are out there and available to you. The Water Well Trust I mentioned, they really work in, economically disadvantaged areas, but you can go to their webpage and find out more information. And there's just help out there that way. So there's also the Single Family Housing Repair and Loans and Grants Program, and it's for any kind of home repair. It's a very low income requirement, but if you do meet that, you can get not only for well treatment, septic, but windows, roof, anything home related. And up to $7,000 of that $20,000 can be a grant if you're over age 62. And so, you apply directly to USDA for that. And I think I have you can go to Single Family Housing Repair Loans and Grants, Google that, and you can get the information there. It has to be 50%. Your family income has to be below 50% of the area median income, which is a pretty low value for most folks. There's also stuff for emergency situations. We reached out to the Texas Well Owner Network, who's a partner on our program after the hurricanes that were there. And certainly you can apply for funding through FEMA if you're unfortunate enough to be involved in an area like where there's been a hurricane. And there should be a FEMA rep available when those events occur. But there's also state programs or county programs or local district programs through watershed districts and other things that may have some of this stuff available. And we don't have an exhaustive list, but we came up with a few, and there's more in that webinar. But you really just need to search for yourself to try to find those things. So for instance, I mentioned the RCAC program, $45,000 for individual wells. This is because of the drought. So the state of California has put up this money to help folks who've had a drought issue and their wells gone dry. And during the heart of the drought, when wells were going dry a lot, you might have to wait over a year to even have a driller available to put in a well in California, which is a real hardship if you live in a more remote area. And so, and I think this is these are grants, so you don't have to pay it back either, which is pretty cool. So Minnesota, during again for emergencies, and I'm just going to show some examples. This is the Tennessee Housing Development Authority. Again, when there's an emergency repair program, so if there's flooding, Tennessee's along some major rivers. You see the Mississippi or the Tennessee River flooding sometimes and causing a lot of problems. And so you can apply for those type of programs. Texas has a veterans program, so that the Texas Veteran Land Board you can get improvements on all that list, which hopefully you can read, for a lot of things if you're a veteran in Texas to get improvements. Through universities, this is through the University of Nebraska at Lincoln for cost sharing through their natural resource districts, which we have soil and water conservation districts in Illinois, but it's often less than $100 at the part that's highlighted there of out-of-pocket expenses to get a well abandoned properly. So decommissioning a well. Even other groups, like this is a corporation that was formed a nonprofit. There's, because it's the New York City watershed, there's a program to help cost share improving septic systems so that it protects the watershed that provides water to New York City. Some state programs, this is the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts has some of the most stringent and aggressive septic management requirements in the country, and partly to protect the Chesapeake and some of those things, but they also then provide betterment loans to homeowners to help back up that program and give people a chance to actually do what they need to do. And so if you click down to that page, you can see renovating systems, hooking up to sewer lines, or replacing septic systems that are Title V, which is a program in their state that, they rewrote the rules basically for septic systems, and there's a lot of requirements and license issues for people who install and inspect, and it really is meant to protect the environment and our water sources. So it's actually a really useful thing. Virginia Housing Development Fund, again for on-site septic, just an example. And even the Department of Ag, this is a program for helping for water quality sampling in agricultural areas, and Florida DEP for water well sampling, even down to county conservation districts, as I mentioned. State of Iowa, they have their state legislature gives money to their counties. It's called the Grants to Counties program, where the counties can either abandon wells with it, or they can provide low cost or no cost sampling services. And it's a pot of money that counties apply for, and most of them do. And then they can get tested, for, like it says in this list here, for coliform and nitrate and no cost. I wish more states had this service, but it's just an example. If you're in Iowa, here's one of the things that you can do related to those practices. And then again, I mentioned soil water conservation districts. Some in Illinois offer cost sharing for up to $750, cost share for abandoning wells, and this is for sampling, and they take off the tests cost less than $10 because they cost share a lot of it. And lastly, I want to mention there's also local programs or state programs just to teach you about being a well owner. So the Texas Well Owner Network is a great example. They've been around for quite a while. They put on workshops all over the state. They have a 1-hour course and a full day course that they offer. They also, you can bring samples to those, and you get the details when you look at their courses. I wanted to mention them. We actually work with 5 of the state extension programs that do similar work: Texas, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Virginia Tech, and Virginia. And so in those states, those 5 extension programs are actually partners with our program and actually with RCAP to provide additional workshops through the funding that we get to help well owners in those states. There are also other extension programs that are active that aren't necessarily part of our network or our grant program, but they're providing those services. Arizona comes to mind. There's a few others, Maryland, I think. And so, actually Maryland just hired a new person last year. So there's these opportunities for you to learn more about your well and in your area based on folks in your state who know your geology better than we do and some of those things. And so I recommend you look to see if any of that's available, or you can email us, and if there's a program like that we know of, we'll let you, we'll respond and let you know. We'll respond either way. And also through our grant, each of the 6 RCAP regions hold well owner workshops. So for instance, this is one that RCAC held in April. I just picked this flyer, or actually Katie picked this flyer for me. And so they put these on all over, RCAC does all over the West in different states. And this is the top half of the flyer. Here's the bottom half of the flyer. If we have you can go to RCAC's website, or there's TFAM's contact information, for instance, or we try to put all these on our website as well. We have a page just for outside workshops. We try to put all the extension workshops, other groups. There's a couple in Illinois that do workshops for well owners that we also put all that stuff available on privatewellclass.org. Just so, if you happen to be in one of those areas, that certainly helps you. But the more local, the better, just because it's going to be tailored towards the things you do. So for instance, Mississippi State does workshops through their extension program, Jason Barrett, and he goes county to county. And so they'll put one on every few months in a different county at their extension office, and they tailor that information. Then they bring in a local driller or someone who has more local information that can answer those well owner questions. And they also offer sampling at those events in Mississippi. So that's what I have on finding local information. I do want to talk a little bit about the private well class, just so you're aware that we're a lot more than these webinars, because we find a lot of times people think that these webinars are the class, and they're not. It's a series of 10 lessons that are sent via email. It's all self-paced. You're on your own to read it. They come as a PDF, but it's worthwhile. And so these webinars are meant to provide more specific information and also give you a chance to ask questions, and that's really what we try to do here. So it's privatewellclass.org. I'll go through this quickly. This is the front page. You click on the bottom left there where it says Learn by Email. I'll go back up because I did, and it takes you to a page where you can sign up for the class. For each of the lessons, so the first lesson is called The Science of Groundwater. There's also this resource page that gives you a lot of other documents that are available from different organizations like NGWA and Ohio EPA and Texas Well Owner Network. Like the Texas Well Owner Guide is excellent. If you're in that area especially, it talks about the geology and all those things. They're just meant to be more resources that you can go to help understand the material we've provided. And so we do webinars like today that we record. We did one last August on a year ago August on lead. That's not something we do every year because all the information is here. We brought in an expert from Virginia Tech to help with that webinar. and talk about private well issues. She's done a lot of research looking at lead in private wells or in private drinking water systems, if you will. And so you can watch that. It's all available. We also created a lead page so that you can go to privatewellclass.org/lead and get to this page, and it talks about some of the things to help remove lead if you do have it. There's water filters that do reduce lead and some of those things. We have short videos on different practices and things. What is a bedrock well? What is a sand and gravel aquifer? What should I know about a shared private well? If you're on a shared well and the person you share the well with is not your relative, and you don't have an agreement in your deed, or you don't have a contract, and the well's not on your property, you're at risk. If they sell that property, the next person may not be willing to share the well. You can't do a lot about it. There's a lot of issues related to shared wells that people don't realize. We see small subdivisions where contractors have went in and put a well in for every 5 homes so they can avoid being considered a public water supply, which is a terrible thing to do. And now it puts 5 well owners or 5 homeowners on one well, and they have to try to share and understand the risks, and also understand that they have to pony up, $3,000 or $4,000 when they have a significant repair, like replacing a pump, or if something happens to their well. And so it's good to understand those things. And so we tried to provide those resources. Pressure tanks, we found out from having this video that a lot of people have water pressure problems, and there's not a lot of information out there. This, since 2016, this has had over 200,000 hits. And so a lot of people are looking at this information just to find basically how a pressure tank works. And that's great, because that's the idea. So we have podcasts that are available. We've only done the first 3 lessons so far, 1, 2, and 3 there, and the others are interviews that I did on RFD Illinois radio network, which is a Farm Bureau's radio network. But those are recorded and available. A lot of downloads, a lot more than I would have expected. It's worked out really well. The entire class is available in Spanish. If you know folks who are native Spanish speakers, you can take the entire class that way. Some of the videos are also in Spanish, and this is the URL at the bottom. So the whole goal of this program is really to help you understand why your well is important, why you really need to understand how it works, as well as geology and all those other things, so that you can protect yourself from risk and from water quality issues. And so hopefully this program does that, and we certainly encourage your feedback, especially on the lessons. There's an evaluation at the end of that after the 10 weeks. And again, it's all self-paced, it's all free, and you're on your own to actually go through the material. So we did get a bunch of questions for today, and I'm going to go through those now. We couldn't answer all of them, and some of them are duplicates basically of things we've either answered in the past or of each other. So if you have questions, Katie's also taking questions in the question box or the chat box, and so you can ask them there. So I'm just going to go right to the questions because it's already 20 after 2 our time. So should I have to pay for a copy of my well log or any information concerning my well? Well, so you shouldn't have to pay your driller. It should be something they hand you. And what we tell well owners is when you got to write a contract with a driller to put in a well, you make sure it says in the contract that you get a copy of all the information they give to the state, the county, or whoever, as well as a copy of the log and any of the materials that they've written about your well when they drill it. And so if that's the case, and it is your driller and they drilled your well and they won't give you information, I'd go complain to the licensing body for drillers and also to the State Drillers Association about the driller. Because if they're a member, then they'll get some peer pressure, and the state may be able to help out there too, or maybe the state has information, but they should give you the log. And I imagine that's not the case. You're talking about an agency. And here's the bottom line. We maintain the well records in the state of Illinois, and the county send them to us. But currently, they've taken the funding away for our program because of the state issues with funding. So we have a grant from our DNR to help fund both our well record program because it supports our planning for water supply in Illinois and things like that. So fees may be the only way to keep a program staffed. If you call us, if we didn't have the grant we have right now and you called us, we would not have a person who could reply to you. And so sometimes fees are necessary. They're not making money off of it, I guarantee you, and it's just the way it is. So If you want to do something about that, you really need to lobby your state legislators or whoever that those services are important and that they should be part of an agency budget. And that's the only thing I know to say to that, because we're in that situation. I manage that program, and so I know how fortunate we are to have soft money because there isn't state money for it currently to support it. Shouldn't a good source of information be the local county authority? So it really depends on which state you're in. You know, sometimes it's a local health district, it's not a county at all. So out east in like Massachusetts, they have over 350, I believe, health districts that all set the rules related to private wells. Their counties are where they have their jails. They're not entities like in Illinois. Our county health departments are part of our state health department, and they look at the permits, they inspect wells, they do all these things. That's done at a different scale in some states. So we do get them, but even in Illinois, the way the law is written, our counties only have to keep the logs for 10 years. So some do that because they don't have space or whatever. It's really short-sighted in my opinion, but they also realize that they send copies to us, and we've got well records going back 100 years. So if they really need an older log, they can always come to us for them. But somebody needs to keep those. And so it really depends on where you're at. Yeah, and if a local health district or county, I'd go to them first. And if they don't have any info, they should be able to steer you to the right state contact if there is one for that information. And in some cases, it may just not be available, especially well logs themselves. I think I mentioned earlier, we probably have half the well logs on file for the wells that are actually in use in Illinois, and we've required logs to be filed since 1968. But again, a lot of older wells are in place. They're grandfathered in when the laws changed, and so they're just there, and we may not even know it. We did, yeah, that's all I'll say there. If I can't find my well log from my own records, the driller, county, or state, how do I find out how deep my well is? Well, the short answer there is you can hire a contractor. They may have to pull your pump to get a water level and a well depth, but they can drop a line down and do that. I don't recommend you doing that with the pump in place. More often than not, there's spacers, there's wires, there's other things going down to the pump where it could be, you might get a tape or whatever you're dropping down the well stuck. And if you know, depending on what that is, that could be a problem anyway. But if there's been any work done on your pump, for instance, or your well at all by someone that's not the driller, like a pump contractor, you know, or some plumbing company, if they're licensed to do that in your area, they may have that information. So if you've ever had, you know, anything fixed, even to your water system, your pressure tank or whatever, had to dig up a line, they may have some of that information. I'd at least ask them first. They may remember who drilled it if you don't. And this person is asking about California. I already showed that example. And what I'd say, the other thing you can look at is all the other wells nearby. So if you can see that, you know, in your section, your 1 mile square around where you live, every well is between 290 and 310 deep, then I would bet dollars to donuts that your well is also that same depth, because there's probably one aquifer that everybody uses and that's all that's available. But if there are different depths, or there's some shallow wells or even some dug and bored wells, large diameter wells, then there's really no way but to have someone come out and check it that I know of. So we measure water levels in wells using steel tapes without anything on the end. They're specially made tapes that most folks wouldn't have access to. And even then you can get them stuck, but they're not good for measuring well depths, just water levels, which typically are much higher up in the well. In California, the counties have jurisdiction for permitting wells. Is it the same everywhere? When selling a property, the well has to be inspected and tested for E. coli. Is this similar in other places? So it's really different everywhere. And I mentioned some of it already, but so are the rules for testing. In some jurisdictions, there's no requirements at all. Others only require property sale, and then there's some that even have more strict rules. So for instance, I mentioned Pennsylvania doesn't license drillers or have a set well construction code. That's an issue. Most states don't have. Alaska does as well. In Mississippi, I mentioned that too. I can't remember if it's 4 or 5 inches in diameter. They don't have to file the logs. So there's a lot of counties where you might not see hardly any private well logs, but that's not an indication that there aren't any wells there. There are, they just don't have them with the state. Going on the positive side, if you will, New Jersey's had a law for 20 years now that requires at every property sale, the state lab has to come out and test. And they don't test for one or two things, they test for like 40 or 50 things. Many of the things that are on the Safe Drinking Water Act list for primacy contaminants, prime contaminants, MCLs, at property sale. They share that with the buyer and the seller. One of them or both of them share the cost. It's $600 or $700, and that's part of the property sale, and no one else can see the results. They map all that information. It's available online, but at a scale so that you don't know which well's which, or they don't show the individual wells, but they know, and so do we, where there's water quality issues in the state of New Jersey, especially naturally occurring contaminants like arsenic and things like that, because they collect 13,000 samples a year that are research quality. It's a great data set. They've got, over 200,000 samples for their state. Rhode Island has the most strict law in the books. They've tied testing of a private well at a property sale to their building inspector program, who has the authority to condemn a property if it comes back with a regulated contaminant that's over an MCL. So basically they're forcing the homeowner to add treatment to remove that contaminant and make the water safe before as a condition of sale. And that's the only state that does that. And I may not have all those rules exactly right, but I know that's the gist of it. And so other states have the New Jersey law, I think Oregon and maybe one other. And then you also have places like Massachusetts, where I mentioned before, they have 350 plus health districts. They can all make their own rules. So I gave a presentation to a bunch of environmental health professionals from local health districts there. I talked to one at a break who said she's condemned 2 wells, and that's just really unheard of around the country. They don't have that authority, but they've created it so they do. There's one other one who said that they require their wells to meet all the EPA drinking water standards. And so, and then there's others that don't do anything. So you could move across the street between one health district and the next in Massachusetts, and the rules completely change for you, which, isn't the way it should be either. We should have more consistency in our rules nationwide. So, yeah, but that's the way it is. How do I know the pump isn't working, needs attention, and what do I do if the pump or pressure tank stops working or needs attention? Okay, so these are questions that you really should know the answer to if you're going to be a well owner. And in our lessons, lesson 5 talks about common problems with wells, like sometimes when your bladder tank, your pressure tank may have problems. It's leaking, or the bladder isn't functioning properly, or it's waterlogged if it's an old tank. You'll see your pump cycling on and off all the time, and that's an indication that something's wrong with your pressure tank. But really with your pump, if it's submersible especially, if it stops working, you'll know you won't have water pressure, but there's not really a lot you can do before that. The only thing I could think of really, they're meant to last a long time, but if your pump is in your basement and you have a shallow pump that is above ground, if you notice a change, if it's working harder, or something with the motor's going bad, you probably can hear that when it's running. But that would be the only time I can think of a way to really understand. We see pumps that last 50 years, and usually when it fails, you get another one. And that's an expense you should plan for every 15 to 30 years is what I would tell people. And your tank can be more challenging. A traditional tank stores water, and it operates between a high and low pressure. So the example that was on the video was 40 to 60 psi. And so when your pressure tank, whenever you use water, it's pushing water, really like if you're squeezing a juice box and water comes out the straw, your pressure tank is pushing water from that bladder that's inside, if it has a bladder, or the air that's in there at a high pressure, 60 psi, through your house. That's why you have water pressure at your second story shower and bathroom. And then when that gets to 40, as the pressure goes down as you use water, because you're taking water out of the tank, you're decreasing the volume of water, so you're decreasing the pressure as you take water out. When it gets to 40, it trips a switch and tells your pump to turn on. And then your pump pumps until it gets back up to 60 again, and then the switch kicks the pump off. And so that keeps you between 40 and 60 PSI all the time. But if it gets waterlogged, or you have a hole in your bladder, in your pressure tank, that's then there's not that volume of air to keep that pressure high. And so then you'll see your pump cycling on and off, because every time you even turn on a faucet to brush your teeth, it makes the pump kick on, and that shouldn't happen. So, or the other option is you could have a hole in your drop pipe, or if you have a check valve so that the water in the pressure tank can't go back down into the well. Sometimes there's a hole in that check valve, and then it's letting water back down when the pump kicks off. And so then you're losing pressure and the pump kicks on more often. And those have to be diagnosed. And I mentioned VFD pumps, which stands for variable frequency drive, because these days now you're seeing pressure tanks that are 1 or 2 gallons, and it's all about the pump. So the pump runs at whatever speed it needs to keep the pressure constant. So if you're taking a shower and running the dishwasher at the same time, the pump may be running full blast to keep the pressure in the house. But if you're only brushing your teeth or maybe doing one of those things, or running a hose outside or whatever, it may only kick on at 40% to keep the pressure at some preset level. And your pressure tank's really there just to give you startup pressure, not to really be a storage vessel like it is in a traditional pressure tank. So some of that stuff's brought up in our private well class, and again, talks about a lot of common issues. If you're going to own a well and you want to be able to take care of it, you really should take the class. As far as choosing a driller or contractor, we've had a couple of questions on that. I need help finding a well contractor who can assist us in repairing a leaking pipe. So we covered this last month too in our webinar on Well Care 101. This slide was in there. I just changed the question, but it's really covered in more detail in lesson 7, which is the lesson we're talking about. Basic things to consider. A good driller or contractor should stand out in your area. Everyone should know who they are. That's who everybody uses. They've had good experiences. Talk to your neighbors, all those things. Be sure that whoever you use is licensed. And if you're in Pennsylvania or Alaska, where they don't require licensed drillers for every instance, every type of well, then I would require them to be certified as a master well driller through NGWA. That's not a requirement by any means, but it means they've gone to that extra level to become more professional and do a better job. They've taken classes even on contracting and those things. And the other a few things I'll mention is you should pick someone that can do all of it, not only the well, but the pump, the lines, all the equipment in the house, so that you're only dealing with one person. Because otherwise you're at risk of sometimes going, well, I drilled the well, but he installed the pump, and well, this other guy put in all the pressure tank stuff. I know it's that, and he said, she said type of stuff. And if you're working with one contractor for all of it, you know who to go to, and they know they have to deal with it. And those usually having that well-rounded experience on all sides of the system makes them a better contractor too, in my opinion. So, but always ask a lot of questions. It's better to understand and know and get a contract. So whenever you're having any work done on your well, or you're drilling a well or whatever, they should have a contract in place. You should with them, and make sure it has those things in it, like make sure I get a copy of a well log or whatever. You can also contact your state. I know, like, we can't recommend drillers, even though I have drillers I know that I can count on. I can't tell you as a well owner in Illinois, you should use this driller. But you can also contact our state Department of Public Health that actually regulates drillers and ask them if they've had any complaints about any drillers. And that's information that should be publicly available to you. And that's one other way around that. So, and as I mentioned right at the beginning, ask your neighbors and others that have been in the area, hey, what happened? We did a study where we looked at a whole bunch of wells in 9 townships, and we came up talking to the well owners with 54 different drillers, and now there's only 4 in that area. And that spans 60, 70 years in some cases. But understanding who's in the game and who's there and what people have had good experiences, it's, especially if you're going to drill a new well or have something significant work done, you want to make sure they're reputable, and the best way to do that, see if they have a BB or a rating with the Better Business Bureau, all those things. Do your due diligence. Someone asked, does a well driller have any idea before they drill where water can be found? And the answer is they should. For one, as we talked about well logs, sometimes they protect their well logs because it means they know what the geology is in an area and their competitors may not. But most drillers have a home area, if you will, where they've done a lot of work. And so they should have drilled lots of wells in that area and know the geology pretty well. And that's going to be generally the case. Rarely are you going to find a driller that doesn't know anything about the area and doesn't have a clue. So that should be the case. They should know where there's going to be water and how deep. Some areas you just don't have water. There's drillers that do nothing but large diameter bored wells, and those are really like a cistern. They store water from the shallow water table because there's no real aquifer to tap into. And so you should know what area you're in, what type of wells, and like in Illinois or whatever state, you can contact us and we can say, I know in Fulton County, Illinois, there's an area where it's all clay down to bedrock. And so all the wells that are there are low yielding and they're all large diameter wells, 3 foot or 4 foot diameter. They may be 30 or 40 feet deep and the water tables at maybe 10, but they're meant to be a storage vessel for water so that you can pump it out when you need it. And then overnight or whatever, water fills back in slowly because it's going through clay, there's no aquifer. So to be sure though, you can also look up this information on your own. And that's what we are encouraging you to do. Look, especially if you go like you're in one of the states I brought up that has a website or a mapping feature, you can look at the geology in advance of all your neighbors' wells. If there's water level data available, even water quality data. If someone calls me, I can look at all our water quality information for Illinois, and I can see if there's any samples that have been done in the area and say, here's what we know about this area. And so I would do that before you even contact a driller. Then you're in a better position that you can share that information. It lets the driller know that you're engaged and that you care about this and that then you want this done professionally in the right way, all that stuff. It'll eliminate anyone who comes in and doesn't really know what they're talking about and says they do. And also it'll help you be able to ask better questions when they come in. Because sometimes well owners really don't know what they need to know. I can tell you tons of stories where even a community water supply operator has said, I got a call from a private well owner who called me and was complaining because they turned on their faucet, they didn't have any water. So we went out there anyway, and sure enough, there's a private well in their front yard and they didn't even realize it. The city water was on the other side of the street, but that wasn't part of their water system. And so this well owner did not know they even had a private well. And maybe it was a spouse of the person who did know. I don't know the exact situation, but that tells you that sometimes well owners don't know what they need to know to be a well owner. So, in contact, again, a state geological survey, Department of Public Health, and other agencies that may be in your state specifically that work on these issues, and find out what you can. It's worth knowing. And a lot of times you'll reach someone, I'll talk your ear off, whether you want me to or not, about if it's an interesting area, and at least explain so that I make sure I feel like you have the details you need as a well owner to understand what you might be up against. And I know Dan Webb, who runs our public service lab, he's not on the call today, but he's also a well owner. And so his perspective's great because he's dealt with it. He's got a filter and he's got an RO unit. He's also a chemist. And so, you have all those sorts of situations at some of these agencies where we can really provide some good information to you. So what to do about arsenic? We have 22 ppb of arsenic in our well that's 87 feet deep. I think this well was also only 5 years old. The driller says that it can't go deeper because there's salt water, which just so everyone's clear, there's salt water in a lot of places in our country if you go deep enough. We're talking millions of years ago, there's an inland sea in the central part of the country. That is in the bedrock today. Southern third of Illinois, you'll drill deep enough, you hit salt water. The TDS is 10,000. So that's a real thing. And a lot of people are surprised by that. But, you can't drink that. You have to desalinate that to actually use it. So, because the secondary standard for like chlorides for taste is 250. And we're talking levels of 10,000. So it's pretty high. But the real question here is, can we use RO under the sink for drinking water, or do they need a whole house system because of exposure to that water at 22 ppb when they're washing dishes and showering? Well, we asked the Minnesota Department of Health. This also came up from a private well owner who contacted me a few months ago, and it's really not considered a concern for exposure with skin or inhalation, like in the shower. So an under sink unit is all you need. And if someone tries to sell you something else, 22 is actually a pretty low level. You know, the health standard in the United States was 50 before 2006 when it was changed. And, you know, and it was rightly changed. There's folks who still think it should be lower, but we see homes that are in the hundreds. And even, I think the question I got a few months ago from an email, the level was 78 parts per billion. And there again, I talked to a health professional because I'm not, and they said that there's really no concern with contact through skin or inhalation. And so RO uses a lot of water and puts a lot of water to waste. And so if you're using a whole house where all the water you use every day is going through that, it's going to cost you a lot of money to have a system like that. Plus, it's a lot more expensive even to buy. And so, you know, our recommendation would be to use an under sink RO for your drinking water. And regarding that, you know, arsenic exists in the ground in two forms in water, +3 or +5. And one's more oxidized than the other. I'm not a chemist, but what I know is if it's in the +3 form, it's not as readily removed by RO. And so in a lot of cases, when you have an RO system, you need to put an oxidizing filter or a chlorinator or something in front of it that oxidizes that arsenic to the +5 form so that the RO will remove it. What I'd suggest if you're settled on RO is that you put in the RO unit, then test your water and see how much it's lowered it. If it isn't getting it low enough or you'd like to get it lower, if you oxidize the water before it gets to the RO system, it'll take out a lot more of it. And the other option for removing arsenic is a filter. I think we talk about that on our webpage. If not, you can email me and I can give you that information. But I know there are, that is another way. It's like a carbon filter. I don't think that's right, but it's, I don't think it's necessarily granular activated carbon, but it might be. But I do have that information. I should have put it on here as another option for removing it, especially if it's in the +3 form. So hopefully that wasn't confusing. Dan's not here to have my back today. So sandpoint well disinfection. I've been told that you cannot disinfect a sandpoint well. Is this correct and why? Well, sandpoints are driven in the ground in a really shallow area where the water table is really close to the surface. So, and typically in sandy soils, which means water from the surface readily infiltrates down in the ground and gets it to the water table. They have no grout, they're not solid, and they have no way to protect from, when you're beating that in, if you're doing it with a sledgehammer, you're disrupting the hole that you're making by beating that in, scraping the sides, sometimes creating a pathway along the well down into right to where the screen is. And so it is susceptible to surface contamination basically by definition. You know, we have an area in Illinois in Mason County where there's a lot of sand points. The aquifer goes down to 100 feet and then it's bedrock, but it's completely sand from the surface down to 100 feet. The water table is as shallow as 3 or 4 feet. So a lot of sand points, but it's also a completely agricultural area. Nitrate application, pesticide application, livestock, all that stuff, vegetable growing. I tell well owners in Mason County they should put their well down to 100 feet, put the screen just above bedrock, and that way you have 95 feet of solid pipe and then a 5-foot screen at the bottom where the water is actually coming in the well. That way any water from the surface has to go through 95 feet of sand, which is a natural filter before it gets to your well. And we see from sampling that we've done there that as you go down, the nitrate values decrease in where that's an issue. So I wouldn't have a sand point and I would not put one in. I know it's a lot cheaper. You can do it yourself. You can buy them at some farm stores, but they're susceptible to surface contamination. And if you have livestock nearby, your septic's very close at all, then that's probably why you have E. coli in the first place. And disinfecting that well is going to solve your problem for a day. And then as the water, groundwater moves constantly towards a place of discharge. So you're going to get water coming from wherever it was coming from before, or if it rains, it's going to push things through from the surface and it'll be contaminated again. And that doesn't just happen with sand points. Sometimes it happens in other wells, especially bedrock wells, just because there's only maybe a couple fractures that all the water is coming from. And when that happens, the only thing to do is to put in continuous disinfection. And that's either continuous chlorine or a UV system right before your pressure tank in your house to basically kill the bacteria before in the house, because you're not going to keep it out of your well. It'll just keep coming back. And that's just my opinion. So, and yeah, they're just dangerous because they're shallow and they're in areas where there's a lot of infiltration. And that's a recipe for contamination if anything gets spilled nearby or there's any source nearby. That's what I have. I did talk too long. We do have a few questions. I'm going to quickly pull those over here. And let me zoom this, make this bigger. I appreciate everyone hanging around that has. Okay, so what's the cost of electricity to run a well pump for a well owner? You know, I don't really know that specifically. It's not something that we deal with. We can try to find out, but I imagine it depends on the size of the pump and how much lift the pump has to have. You know, if the water level's at 10 feet, it costs a lot less to lift it to your house than if the water level's at 150 feet, and it requires a bigger pump and more power. And so, you know, it's really a factor of, you know, even, yeah, where you live. And there's all those factors. And I know I work a lot with irrigators, and for their systems that are electric, we see even from in Mason County, the same area where it's all sandy, the south end of the county, the water table is only 4 or 6 feet. The northern end of the county, it's more like 40 or 60 feet. And the electric costs to pump the exact same amount of water is significantly more when it's the 40 to 60 feet. Of course, they're pumping 1,000, 1,200 gallons a minute. They're really, you know, they're using a big pump and all that stuff. But it really varies based on how big of a pump you need and how much lift you have to have. And there's pump curves for all that. And, you know, I haven't done any of that since I was in school 30 years ago. So I don't have a good answer for you. I'd ask a contractor. They can help you with that. Are PFAs considered an emerging threat to private well systems, as is the case with public water supply systems? They definitely are. So PFAS is, you know, pretty ubiquitous, and that's what we've learned. And so, which is why you see some states passing rules. It doesn't exist everywhere, but if you're near, especially near an airport, or, you know, for instance, we're right next to the Illinois Fire Institute where they do fire training for the whole state. There's no groundwater supplies right near here, but I imagine our shallow groundwater has PFAs in it, or PFAS chemicals in it as well from that. And, you know, it's a tough situation. I think, you know, EPA's decided to regulate it. The problem there is it doesn't really help well owners, for one, and two, for them to pass a rule that creates an MCL for PFAS compounds. As soon as they pass it, it's going to be outdated because of new types of, there's like 70 of those chemicals or more, or hundreds of those chemicals. And I don't think they really know enough about all of them to know which ones are a health risk and which ones aren't. And it's just, you know, this is a case where you need to listen to any emerging health information that comes out and those recommendations from either CDC or US EPA or local or state government on what you need to do. You know, they're still even working on the methods for detecting those. There's more labs today than there were 6 months ago that can do the analysis for PFAS compounds. But it's, you know, it's one of those things that caught everyone by surprise nationally, and it's not that easy to gear up. And so it is an emerging threat. And if you're in an area where, that may be more likely, then I'd talk to your local health department about what to do. And maybe your state primacy agency that regulates community water supplies. They've all, like our Illinois EPA has had to deal with PFAS issues in Illinois already. And so, and so is every state. And there's a lot of information out there, but there's also a lot of bad information out there. I wouldn't look at the media. I would look at more like regulator websites, the folks that it's their job to protect public health in your state and area. And lastly, how to measure flow rate of an old water well or a new well. Well, what a driller does when they test the well, they can drop their own pump in it before they put the pump in that's going to remain, that's larger than what is going to be in the well. So they may put a pump that'll pump 25 gallons a minute or 15 gallons a minute in a well where when they finish it, they're going to put a 5 gallon a minute pump. They measure the water level, they put the pump in, they pump it for a couple hours, and they take several water level measurements while they're doing that and see what the drawdown is. And then you get an idea of how good the well is, if you will, how much water it can pump, and what kind of drawdown you're going to see. And so, there's areas like in Pennsylvania where there's really, or in the mountains where there may be granite and just a few fractures where a well may not pump more than half a gallon or a gallon a minute. And in those cases, you have to do special things. Like one well owner I worked with in Colorado, his well pumped a half a gallon a minute. So he put in a 3,000 gallon tank cistern with its own pump, and he basically pumps from his well to a cistern constantly at a half gallon a minute, so that in the morning and evening when he needs water, he's got it available. And that's just, but that's so he can live on the side of a mountain in a really pretty place. And so it really just depends on your area, but that's how a well driller will test the rate of a well when they install it. Some don't do that. They're not required to. If I'm putting a well in, I'm having them test that and making sure I get the information so that I always know it. So I hope that answers your question. Otherwise, you pump, you can use drawdown, but then you have to measure the water level before you pump, static and pumping water level, and that may be a bit complicated. The state of Oregon requires you to put a piezometer tube in your well installation when you put in a new well, and that's basically a little 3/4 inch pipe that goes all the way down that you can use then to measure the water levels through that, so you're not affecting your well per se, and you're not at risk of getting something stuck in the well. And we actually list that in our class lessons as a best practice. If I'm putting a new well in, you should put a piezometer tube in the well so you can use, and it's really just a pipe that's 3/4 inch diameter that you can drop a tape down and measure the water level that way, and that would make it a lot easier. Because really it's a relationship. You pump 100 gallons a minute, it's going to draw the well down a lot more than if you're pumping 10 gallons a minute. And by pumping for a certain length of time, you get an idea if it's sustainable or not, because eventually it'll reach more of a steady state and it's not going to lower anymore. There's enough water coming into the well from our surrounding aquifer to fill that in. So, all right, that's what I have. It looks like here's some information if you're looking for continuing education credit. And thanks everyone for attending. And remember, you can email us at info@privatewellclass.org if you have any questions. So thanks for your time.